You are listening to the Love and Confidence Podcast, episode number 137. Welcome to the Love and Confidence Podcast. If you're a woman who wants to feel more irresistible, have more fun, and create deeper and more authentic connections, this podcast is for you. I am your host, certified life coach Lærke Nielsen, and I help you become the best and most confident version of yourself so you can attract the love life you desire. Let's get started. Hey there. Welcome back to the podcast. Today I'm going to talk about something that I feel really strongly about because it's something that I have struggled a lot with and that I think a lot of you might struggle with without really knowing it, or you struggle with it and you are completely aware, but you don't know really how to manage it and how to change it and what to do about it. This is about becoming good at communicating the difficult things, the emotionally challenging things when you are in a relationship or when you are dating someone and you have a hint of this anxious attachment. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why this is a skill that many anxiously attached struggle with, why it's difficult and in what ways it's difficult, and why it's so important actually to learn how to do this for the sake of the relationship, but also to become more secure. And then I'm going to give you some examples to what it could look like and how you can know if you are struggling with communication in this particular way. And then I'm going to share with you some tips on how to change that. So anxiously attached people will typically have a fear of abandonment and a fear of rejection that can determine the behavior or limit a little bit the behavior they have inside a relationship. And the thing that stops an anxiously attached person from communicating clearly what is going on in their mind is typically this fear of abandonment and also a lot of self-doubt around whether it's actually okay to feel the way they do, whether it's okay to feel triggered by something. And the problem is when we don't communicate this, it only perpetuates the anxiety. Because one of the most basic elements in feeling safe and secure with another person is that you have a clear understanding and you have aligned expectations, and there is no stories in your mind that you cannot share, and there's no black box things that you cannot talk about, and things that really bother you but you feel so scared of opening up about. That only makes you feel more anxious inside a relationship. And if we have things that we feel are triggering, it easily can create a drama and a story based on all the crazy imagination we can have, and that can escalate in our heads. So it's important to communicate. It's important to talk before this grows into something that's difficult to let go of and creates a lot of distance between yourself and your partner. So what could it look like? How could it show up in your behavior? It could be that you just don't speak your mind when something has triggered you. You feel hurt or sad about something your partner said or did, and you start to worry and feel insecure about their behavior. And then instead of having a conversation about it, you silence yourself because you're afraid that he will find it unattractive. He will see you as needy or clingy if you tell him that you were triggered about the thing he said. And so you try to push it down. And the problem is that never really works. And the longer you don't talk about something, the more it grows in your head and the more space it takes up and the more disconnected you feel from him and in a way also from yourself. When there's something unspoken between you, and even if you are the only one who knows that, he might also very well sense that too, and he also feels that there's a distance between you. And this could be the situation where he notices something is off and he asks you what is wrong or if you are okay, and where you just pretend that all is good, knowing that it isn't really. Now, I've been guilty of this myself many times. And what I want to share is also in this situation where you feel triggered about something, you might actually judge yourself for feeling triggered. You might have this idea that I'm not supposed to feel triggered by this because he didn't mean anything about it. It was never his intention to hurt me. but it doesn't change that you are triggered by it. And instead of speaking up, you are judging your own reaction and you are doubting yourself if you have a right, so to speak, to feel triggered. You might tell yourself that you are too sensitive or you're too much. And I don't know if you recognize this. Maybe someone in your past has told you that you are too sensitive. Maybe someone from another relationship in the past, or maybe it could be during your childhood. Someone told you again and again, you're too sensitive or you are too much, you are overreacting. And this is something we very easily internalize. And then we tell ourselves that we don't have a right to feel triggered. I shouldn't feel sad by this. I shouldn't worry about this. He didn't mean anything by it. So we try to push all our feelings away, but it doesn't help because they are there anyway. So whatever started the reaction, it still bothers you, and it will until you decide to talk about it. So it can also be a situation where you have expectations to him and they are not communicated and you are not aligned about that. And we can't always assume that because we think something is normal, then he will agree. He will, of course, also think this is normal. Other people have different ideas about what is normal, and it's very typical for an anxiously attached person to not communicate their expectations because they don't want to come across as someone needy. And then they feel hurt or neglected when the other person doesn't meet their expectations. And then we tell ourselves that we can't really communicate this because it wouldn't have been the same if he did or said something just because we ask for it. It has to come naturally, otherwise it doesn't have the same value. He has to magically figure out by himself what is on our mind and what is it that we expect from him. So this could be how and when you expect him to respond to a message, for instance. Let's say you send him a text with something vulnerable and you expect him to react much faster than he does. And when you don't hear from him, you feel that you are not important to him anymore, or you feel ignored or neglected. Or it could be how you want him to show up on your birthday. That you expect him to call you in the morning or show up with flowers and so on, and then you get offended if he doesn't. And the reaction we typically have when we realize he didn't meet our expectations is not to reach out and communicate, is to go quiet and to withdraw and give him the silent treatment, which doesn't solve any issue at all. And then we wait for him to discover our silence so that he can start to wonder what's wrong and did I do something wrong? Did I say something wrong? Because this is what we would have done in his shoes. We would have had these thoughts. But it's not necessarily what he does. He might discover that something is off, but he doesn't see your silence as an invitation to have a conversation where he asks you to open up. And here you could make it so much easier for yourself if you just decide to talk about it yourself before it turns into something really awkward. Or if you decide that it's actually not that important, then let it go. Don't let it linger and surface up next time you have a similar experience. It can also be that you don't say your honest opinion about something. You pretend in order to please him and you compromise yourself. And then afterwards, you get upset by him because you feel that he made you do something that you didn't actually want, or he made you agree to things that you didn't agree on. But it was actually yourself who decided to not speak your truth. So, ironically, what this means is that the anxiously attached has an avoidant behavior. The anxiously attached is avoiding conversations, avoiding speaking their truth, avoiding being honest and clear and looking the other person in the eyes and telling them what's on their mind because they are so afraid of abandonment. And so maybe you recognize some of this from your past or current relationship and you wonder, how can I change that? And of course, if you're holding yourself back because you fear abandonment, you have to take a look at that and ask yourself if it's worth being in a relationship where you make yourself become inauthentic and you feel triggered often and you never say anything. So you have to ask yourself if this is actually what you want, if this is the kind of relationship you want. You can't let fear of abandonment make you into a person that you are not and someone who constantly silences herself because then you are abandoning yourself. So this is your step number 1. Choose to not abandon yourself. Take a good and honest look at what you are experiencing. What are the emotions and where do they come from? What triggered you and what is the deeper reason for that? Be honest with yourself here. Also, if what is holding you back is self-doubt, the idea that it was nothing and I shouldn't react here, I don't really have a right to react here, then you have to drop this idea of what you should and shouldn't. Because what often happens is that we say we shouldn't react, but then it still lingers, it's still hanging in the air. So better to face it and communicate it, even if it feels like a small thing. It is not a small thing if you keep feeling upset. So, step number 1, choose to not abandon yourself. Gain the awareness of what is triggering you and why. And then step number 2 is to communicate this. And here you want to take a moment to think about how. In these situations, what you definitely want to avoid is to blame or shame your partner. You don't want to say, you trigger me, or I feel bad when you ignore me. This is not opening up for a healthy conversation. Instead, you want to stay at your own lane and be conscious of the fact that your emotions are created by your perception and your triggers. So choose to communicate with vulnerability and honesty. And this could look something like this. You say, I know it might seem like a small thing, but I really want to share this with you because it's been on my mind for some days and I keep circling back to it and it makes me feel insecure. And then you tell him what it is you feel triggered by. But always lead with vulnerability and honesty, not with criticism and blame. And then be open to hear his response, even if you might actually get triggered again. In that case, you want to ask, well, what do you mean by that? You want to be curious and try to see the situation from his perspective, even if that can actually sometimes be very difficult. But do that, try to listen, and if he says something that makes you feel that he's treating you in an unfair way or he's judging you, then don't let the fear of abandonment or the anger that you might feel in this moment, don't let that block you from hearing what it is he wants to say. So I'm not asking you to suppress your emotions, but to stay open and curious long enough to actually hear his side of the story. And then you can have a situation where after reflecting, you see that the thing that triggered you was most likely a result of previous bad experience and not an example of neglect or lack of consideration from his side. Like he was out with some friends, for instance, at a party where, there were women who had expressed an interest in him. And you sent him a good night message and he didn't respond before the next day. And you started worrying about what happened at that party. Whereas he just didn't pay attention to his phone or didn't want to answer you before he had a quiet moment. And then he reassures you that nothing happened and he had no romantic interest in anyone else than you. And he's very sorry that you felt this and he doesn't want you to feel insecure. And he doesn't want you to feel insecure. And so you realize that the reason you felt upset was due to a past relationship where there was infidelity. And you see that it has nothing to do with your present relationship, and he's apologizing for having made you upset and clearly shows you that he wants to prevent this from happening again. But it could also be that you realize that you are just not aligned, and the thing that triggers you and that you truly feel very vulnerable about is something that's completely natural to him. Like you didn't know where he was last Friday night, and he normally tells you everything and every time he's going out with friends. And then you discover by coincidence that he had dinner with a female friend whose existence you have never heard about. And you find it strange that this one evening he didn't tell you where he was going, and even more strange that he goes to have dinner on a Friday evening with a female friend who happens to be single, who happens to like him a lot, and this one time you don't know anything about where he is. And then he might react by saying that he doesn't want to feel like you're controlling him or he's under surveillance and he should have the freedom to do whatever he wants. And maybe even indicating that your reaction could be a sign that you are not compatible after all. So this is a totally possible outcome of a conversation like this. But then you have to again listen. You have to listen to understand where he's coming from. Stay open and curious. And then when you feel you have his side of the story, you have heard what he wanted to communicate to you, then you get to reflect on that and you get to decide what consequences this might have for you. Whether you are okay with not feeling aligned on a point like that, or whether you actually think that this conversation only makes you feel more insecure about your relationship than what you did before. And in that case, you might want to think about whether this is a deal breaker and whether you have to walk away. But then you are not walking away because of the conversation. You're walking away because of a lack of alignment and that you don't share values on a very important point. And this conversation only brought light to that. And you don't want to stay with someone that you're not aligned with just because you feared the conversation. On the other hand, in the situation where you turn out to be very aligned and he maybe expresses that he is glad you told him about your worry, this can actually lead to you feeling even more connected and feeling even more secure, because then you've shown yourself that you can speak up and you can have a conversation without the drama, and you don't have to silence yourself moving forward. You can also take a moment and imagine the opposite situation where it's him who feels upset or triggered by something you did or said, but he tries to suppress it and forget about it. However, you sense that something is wrong. Maybe he's pounding or he's being more silent than normally, and you start to feel insecure and worry about what's wrong. So you want him to trust you enough to tell you that. You would want him to open up so you can get a chance to discuss and clear the air. As long as we're not even telling the other person what's wrong, we're not giving them a chance to react. So think of this. You would have wanted him to speak up. So why are you silencing yourself? It does take courage to have this kind of conversations, but it also just takes courage to be in a relationship. And a relationship where you feel you have to silence yourself to keep it, it's not a relationship worth having. So, be courageous, speak up, tell him what's on your mind, do it with honesty and vulnerability, and be open and curious and listen to his response. And you might actually have an even stronger relationship afterwards. This was all I had for you today. I hope you found it useful, and I want to thank you for listening all the way to the end. Have a wonderful week. If you like what you're hearing on this podcast and you want to get support from a coach on your love journey, I invite you to book a free consult call with me. You will find the link in the show notes. And also, don't forget to subscribe, and I would love it if you would rate and review this podcast, and then you'll also help other women find it.